In the last international meeting and international fora, regardless of the topic, number of edition, or the city where it takes place, the invariable has been the disagreement and confrontation between two or more visions of the world. Historic delegates quickly acknowledge, almost generalized knowledge, that things are not okay and that changes must be made. Which ones, depending on the model. There's the responsibility of what not is working, and wait until the moment of global chaos to admit deficiencies. We are listening to the comeback of the superpowers. Is the position of the United States deteriorating? The arms race is coming back. The Munich conference, has this order installed after the Second World War come to an end? These are our questions for our critical move today. We will look at facts and actors involved. From last February 15 to 17, edition 55 of the Security Council took place in Berlin. The dynamic was centered in the old world order and the dispute between world powers. We want to share part of what the Russian, Chinese, German and Iranian delegations said. We had proposed the United States to start these discussions considering the need to clarify some of the concerns we have with the U.S. decision of denuclearizing some of the submarine launchers and some of the heavy bombarders. Until now, no significant consultation has been sent. China develops its capacity strictly in agreement with its defensive needs that do not represent a threat for anybody else. Therefore, we oppose to the multilateralization of INF. Disarmament is something that concerns us all, and we hope that this would not only take place with the United States, Europe, but also with China. In Munich, Mr. Payne repeated this farce when arrogantly he demanded Europe to join the United States to protect its own security. Its odious accusations against Iran and anti-Semitic accusations against a man described as a Messiah in the Saint Torah for saving Jews are ridiculous, but at the same time very dangerous. Now we would like to show on our map some features of the Munich conference that had the presence of leaders from 40 countries around the world. The Munich Security Conference, or International Defense Meeting. The elites debate on security and defense, and this edition, number 55, 500 people between heads of state and government and other politicians attended. Competition and cooperation among the powers, future of the European Union, and strained transatlantic relations. The report titled was The Great Puzzle. Who will pick up the pieces? Founding fractured world order. The German premier chaired this meeting at several years. The founding conceived in 1963 during the Cold War. Edwin von Kleist and Edward Teller were among the founders. Edward Teller was the father of the hydrogen bomb in the United States. At the end of the 90s, the conference was called the International Defense Symposium. Later, guests from all over the world came, and then it was left for the purchases of missiles and tanks. Nevertheless, the agenda went more to questions on global security. No other place unites or gathers so many people, government representatives in such a small space. The conference is introduced as independent. Nevertheless, the Munich Security Conference non-profit has benefited broadly from the German subsidies. We will now share information on web pages. photos that Spiegel from Germany published. Mike Pence, the U.S. Vice President, described a strange parallel world. America First policy is erratic. The United States does not lead. It gives instructions that Europeans have received in this conference. The usual Q&A session was not available for Pence. As soon as Vice President ended his speech in teleprompter, he abandoned the room. There was no place for discussions in this meeting. I now go to Russian news agency TASS that in 2017 published, 10 years after Putin's Munich speech, whence the threat to peace. This fact was published 2 years ago, but the predictions were clear and are still effective. He said that his speech was historic, prophetic. The supremacy of force above law was one of the points. Arms race, expansion of NATO, and 2 quotes we want to mention here. One on disarmament. Together with the United States, we agreed to reduce our strategic nuclear missile production. Russia will comply its obligations strictly, and we hope our partners act transparently and refrain from leaving 100 nuclear heads for a day of rain. The other is about the militarization of foreign space. At that time, Putin said, Star Wars is no longer a fantasy. All arms should be excluded from the foreign space. And now I would like to go to our recommendation published on February 17 by telesurtv.net, written by Alfredo Jalife Bratman, international analyst, professor, expert in globalization. From Warsaw to Munich, Mike Pence seeks to satisfy Israel. In any case, we would like to anticipate with this recommendation that German ambassador president of the Munich Security Council seeks to rescue the world unipolar world to preserve the international liberal order. The foreign affairs minister of Germany diagnosed that this globalist world order no longer exists, while the former Russian minister Igor Ivanov warned about the perfect storm, the cumulative effect of several simultaneous crises that could destroy the old international system before starting to build a new one. Pence was sent too far here, and his speech in CSM disturbed European countries like Great Britain, France, and Germany that were urged to join his opinion. These are important points analyzed by Alfredo Jalife. Besides what Sergei Lavrov said, what else did Russia say in this space? Chancellor from Moscow tells us. Greetings for you and all viewers. During the Munich Security Council number 55, the attending countries debated on the risks to peace and international security by this Euro-Asian nation. Minister Sergei Lavrov attended and met the Secretary of NATO to analyze and examine the risks, especially Russia in relation with European countries that are part of NATO, especially after the growing rise of NATO members, Poland, Estonia, and the 4 battalions that have incorporated 600,000 to 1,200 soldiers, and on the other hand, the anti-missile shields of the United States. The Kremlin is also concerned about the announcement of the United States' exit from the missile treatment signed with this nation in 1987, and that did not contain an expiration date, but the U.S. announcement could mean a new arms race. Russia and Putin had stated in a meeting with Sergei Lavrov and the Minister of Defense of this nation, Sergei Shoigu, stating that 2019 and the following years would have a readjustment of the military budget of the Ministry of Defense, and especially compliance with the new strategic forces of Russia. They were talking about ballistic, intercontinental ballistic missiles that Russia is producing. This was a call to open doors to negotiations for the United States to be able to reflect about the exit from this treaty. The next postponement of this treaty start perhaps for 2021, but the United States has not given any answer about this news, especially that START 3 means reducing strategic weapons regarding nuclear to 1,550 and reduce launchers to 700 units. Russia continues calling to preserving peace, international peace and security, because of the risks of a nuclear war between the United States, Russia, and Europe. This conference security was also talked about destabilization of the security system in the world. Thank you, Hansel. From the speech given by Pence in Munich, we conclude that disagreements between Europe and the United States persist. We now go to Washington with Alina Duarte on this topic. NATO summit in June last year, the gap between the United States and Europe has opened. Conflict seems inevitable because Munich showed the rupture that Donald Trump has created during 2 years of his administration, despising multilateralism and choosing choices that begin and end in the White House. This is the last of episodes of a long list of decisions of the President of the United States, leaving several agreements with Iran and Russia. Nevertheless, during this security conference in Munich, the United States, through Vice President Mike Pence, urged the European Union to align with Washington regarding Venezuela. The attendance heard too much, like when Mike Pence saluted Venezuela or Angela Merkel criticized Donald Trump for the threats of tariffs and said she was surprised that the United States wanted to have German cars as a threat to international security. This industry has created thousands of employment in 300 factories in the United States. Merkel said she was surprised with this, which caused laughs and applauses among the audience. German Foreign Affairs Minister and other leaders criticized U.S. administration actions that they believe are hostile against multilateral cooperation and insisted that it can't be broken into 1,000 pieces. Nevertheless, Donald Trump's administration seems to continue with it. Thank you for your information in this critical move. We must wonder what will these differences cause between historic allies. Are we close to the collapse of the neoliberal order? Established after the Second World War? Is there an implosion of the neoliberal order? We're going to interact with our guests after this small pause.
Conferencia de Múnich.
What is the future of global order? Forbes magazine, inequality is worse than what we think, and the states play an important role. Wealth inequality is way worse than you think, and tax havens play a big role. Written by Pablo Nicolás, a writer of several important magazines. He uses data and conclusions contributed by Berkeley and Gabriel Zuman and published by the National Bureau of Economic Research. And he says, according to statistics recently released by the Central Bank of a number of prominent tax havens, suggest that the equivalent of that are concentrated in tax havens, and it is concentrated in more than United States, China, and Europe together. 126 families have 40 times more wealth than one family with average income. There are many questions regarding this because some wonder, is this a threat to global security? This was this discussed in Munich? No. Another topic is the Security Conference of Munich, climate change and collapse of the world order. Those who talked about this talked about multiplier of threats, migration, terrorism, disease, instability in the world. And there are threats of conflicts like those we were dealing in Kashmir will be accentuated. And this is dealt with this German. John Kerry said that they talked about we are currently living by act and omission a common suicide pact. We know how to do things, but we are not doing them. We are on the road to increase 4 degrees in the century. Are we talking about this? John Kerry asked, former U.S. official. It's a paradox that a U.S. representative make these questions. The title of the report is not optimistic. It seems an admission that the road has been lost and the future is uncertain and dangerous. The prologue of the report tells us that they are opening a road of war between great powers like the United States, China, and Russia, with a leadership void in the international liberal order. While nobody can know what will be the next global war, I'm still quoting, they need new management tools to avoid a result where nothing is left to recover. The report is nothing optimistic. They don't agree on any challenge that plans to confront. There are no solutions of Russia or the agreement with Iran, the commercial war with China, the relations between the same liberal world, the U.S. withdrawal from the short and medium scope missiles, and the reciprocal move from Russia at a time where nuclear weapons seem to increase, seems difficult to sustain weapon control mechanism. The states with weapons seem to be increasing their arsenals in order to obtain advantage in a period of uncertainty. In period 2006-2016, the U.S. military budget increased from $500,000 to $600 million. The budget of NATO increased last year, and they expect more. Russia has also increased its defense budget, although President Putin said that this must not be interpreted as if Russia is wasting resources. We have only done crucial moves for globalization. In his statement in 2016, in 2007, in the Conference of Munich, said that I think that expansion has nothing to do with the modernization of the alliance. It's a provocation that damages mutual confidence and impairs the right to ask. Who is this expansion destined to? More important data. I present our guests from Valencia, Spain. We have Carlos Martinez, has a degree in international law, international analyst in several media. And from Brussels, we have Alex Sanfon, independent journalist. Welcome both. I will start with Carlos. The neoliberal order is admitting that things are not going well. We were saying that they are admitting, recognizing this in the report that was distributed even before the encounter. Is someone admitting the responsibility? Good afternoon. Well, nobody assumes responsibility, which in this case is basically belongs to the United States, that is pressing the world towards a global chaos when there is no socialist bloc to confront. Nevertheless, we are looking at how the Cold War, commercial war, is growing in several spaces where they are governments that are subjected to the empire, together with complete chaos. And this is promoted by something that we almost never say. The United States seems a growing empire in the military aspect because of its expenditure, which is almost the same that all the other nations together. And the United States, nevertheless, has less weight in the world economy, and that's a great problem. It doesn't know how to recover its old weight, and this makes the policies multiply that beyond improving the economy as a whole. What they're doing is world conflicts, highly violent with a very small economic interest. And of course, I think we are starting the end, I would not say the world capitalistic system, but the end of the U.S. hegemony that will be replaced probably by China, that is growing economically in an impressive way, and that is obtaining allies and partners in the world without need to send war weapons from the White House. I ask our other guests from Brussels to know your opinion in this regard with other words. Are we attending a specific opacity? What would this leave us? Hello, Lucia. Thank you for your invitation. The situation is has great contradictions, and therefore we have this scent of new Cold War, and this rivalry between great powers must give place to the participation of the peoples. We are currently looking, for example, in a country like France, a great power, one of the two countries in Europe that handles the forced relations, of movement of yellow vests that has 3 months on the streets, and the French government's repression is huge, with thousands of arrestees. We must remember that France has an arrest system called regard de vue that is condemned by the European Court of Human Rights as an abusive practice of the forces of order. So we see how Macron, in his meeting in the meeting of G20 in December, proposed what for him was his interpretation of the world order, and saying that he was favorable to multilateralism. I asked myself, what multilateralism is that when in a certain time French president and other European presidents would decide will recognize unilaterally an alleged alternative president in Venezuela. So we are looking at how democracy, or what some have called liberal order, is not order and is not liberal and is having cracks, increasing cracks, and the masks are falling in this order that actually is no other thing than the reflex of a relation of forces. We must not forget that international law, the UN Charter, are historic conquests of the peoples, that in the context of the Second World War, many countries in Europe resisted Nazism. So this didn't fall from the sky. And in order to preserve it, we need to reinstate the tradition of struggle. Without the context of the 50s and 60s, where there was a decolonization movement, and there has been a period of great confusion and loss of markers, ideologic markers. I think this is a key moment for the peoples of the world to reinstate this anti-imperialist flag as a defense of the countries where balance is at stake, the future of humanity. And I would talk about a country like Palestine, the Bolivarian Revolution. I would like to name Cuba, these places where the peoples today must reinstate international solidarity to defend historic conquests. The participation of the peoples and international solidarity. This is your response. I want to go back to Carlos. They admit changes in the correlation of forces. They are talking about competition between superpowers. In a very largely mentioned speech of 2007, Russian president talked about the impossibility of unipolar models in the contemporary world. I would like to make some precision. What is today's world? Tripolar, unipolar, or we listen to Germany talk about multilateralism, for example. In fact, the world continues to be unipolar. It is the U.S. empire that has bases all over the world. The currency is sadly still used. The language, the common language of the world, beyond our borders, is English. The movie industry, the media industry is commanded by the United States. But there are cracks in this unipolar world. And this is the prophetic statement that Putin mentioned almost 10 years ago. The fact is that, as I said before, this impressive U.S. power at all aspects is encountering difficulties because other actors are rising and competing with them in different aspects, especially in the economic, commercial aspect, and energy aspect. The problem of Russia, for example, and Putin's problem is when Russia incorporates to global capitalism, but it's not accepted as partner, as an equal partner, but subjected or almost third world partner. And of course, with China, China has been, in the last years, a very smart leadership that after it overcame the idea of a third world country with state capitalism, it is reaching a spectacular development and increasing economic development. This talks about other countries that are associated with Russia and China, India, South Africa, Brazil, countries that are also trying to lead its own road apart from the empire. But of course, this is causing serious problems. And what we can mention today in the serious disagreement between Eastern Europe and United States, because Europe not only needs energy, but also from Iran, but also from Russia. And there are problems for the control of the Middle East, and we must understand the interference in Libya, Iran, and Syria in this sense. And now they are also interfering and attacking Venezuela, and as if it were the poorest in the world, when it's not so. The U.S. behavior, such aggressive behavior, is because it is really concerned for the growth of other actors in the world. And, of course, the United States that presumes of democracy, human rights, freedom, and human rights, because we must remember that behind the United States, there are actions that put in question those human rights. Well, differences between the United States and Western Europe have arisen regarding Iran, nuclear agreement, and restrictions that Europe has biased with some agreements. There wasn't an agreement regarding Nord Stream 2 gas duct through the Baltic region that seeks whereby Europe would be able to purchase gas directly. I would like to ask where does this confrontation will lead between Merkel and the United States? I wouldn't call it a confrontation for the time being. I think there is different tactics. European countries like France and Germany have interest in Iran and their participation in the Middle East as well, or their interventions in Africa, is based on this interest to split the pie. We are in a colonization process. We must not forget this recent context. We simply must remember when in 2003 the United States invaded Iraq, France at that time had a different approach. So there were countries that rejected the participation in the war. Nevertheless, if we look at the balance in these years, we can see how they have adapted very well to the U.S. strategy in the region. We must consider that Europe, the European powers are colonized by the United States. The European countries have U.S. and NATO military bases that are subjected to the strategy of the United States. So the fact that Pence insists, as Trump has done, that the European countries should increase their contribution to NATO in 2% shows that what there is an interest in a higher participation. We must say things clearly. The United States and Western powers meet to debate their security is a laugh to the world. We have seen how in Syria they are broadly responsible for that situation, and the consequences of the financing and the support to mercenaries, both in Libya and Syria, has destabilized all the region, both in African countries, Central Africa, Mali, and Iraq, Syria, etc. And we see how Egypt is also having attacks. And this is a long-term strategy. Therefore, while this subjection, while Europe keeps subjected to U.S. strategy, things won't change. Meanwhile, there could be some exceptions or some different approaches, but for the time being, these are more tactic differences and not essential. Thank you, Alex, for your position. I would like to ask Carlos about the following. We were reviewing the report, and on page 17 of the final document, there's a list of countries with the 10 international conflicts to follow in 2019. Venezuela is in the 10th and last place. No country of Latin America, no other Latin American country. I want to ask you what this means, but before we would like to share part of what Pence said in this space. We must all support the Venezuelan people until liberty and democracy is recovered. This is why today we ask the European Union to take a step for freedom and recognize Juan Guaido as the only legitimate president of Venezuela. Now I ask you your opinion, Carlos. Well, we have an unmasked aggression of the empire against Venezuela because they don't like the democratically elected president, so democratic that the legislative chamber is controlled by the opposition. I think that this attack to Venezuela is direct when they overlook countries that are really subjected, and no media talks about this country when they don't talk about Honduras, Guatemala, and even Mexico, and in general all Latin America that suffers much more than Venezuela, which is the excess of weapons and violence. We all know that the United States is a great consumer of cocaine and marijuana, and this is exchanged with the weapons that are sent to Latin America. What Latin America has to do is become independent from the United States, stop being its backyard to resolve many problems that Venezuela has today and many other neighbors. In any case, no other country has more freedom and liberty than Venezuela. To place it in place number 10 is the same they did with Afghanistan, Syria, Libya, that countries that were individually attacked by the United States and that never received humanitarian aid that has now been sent. And nevertheless, no country has improved their situation with any humanitarian aid. On the contrary, there has been other situations, for example, Libya, an authoritarian country, or countries without government, and in case of authorities, these are completely subjected to the United States and attack innocent citizens. Thank you, Carlos, for your opinion. I go back to Alex in the end of this segment. A war in Syria, a German minister asked, is it a good idea for the United States to withdraw from Syria rapidly? And does this strengthen Iran and Russia's capacity to influence them? Is it assumed as a defeat of the United States, which in fact the United States has not withdrawn from Syria? In fact, well, Mike Pence has said that the United States will keep a strong presence in the region and will continue pursuing any signs of Islamist State each time it assumes, as said. We must understand that strategy of struggle against terror is simply the renewal of struggle against communism. And what does this mean? That any attack that could take place and that could be vindicated by anyone with a black flag in practice or through videos in the social media, these attacks will be presented as terrorism and will justify the military presence in the zone. This is the scheme we have seen in the recent years in the African continent, and we have seen it in Syria with multiple groups, terrorist groups, but that are financed by different countries. And one of the things that are not informed is that in many cases there have been directly supported by Western countries and its allies like Turkey and that have trained these groups. So behind all this there is great hypocrisy. And evidently, Europe does not want these struggles to go back. I would remind that these terrorist groups were promoted by many governments in Europe, including the Belgian government, that stated that one day they would receive a monument. They would make a monument to the people who would defeat the Syrian government. So, today, the battle is decisive, which is the battle for information against the war propaganda. Without a right to the people's information, plural information, imperialist strategies will not be able to be defeated. This is why we must be alert on the use of social networks and fake news. That is not new. This has existed for decades, if not centuries. So I think that the true battle will be informative. There is an ongoing psychological war in each conflict where United States and Western powers has put an eye on the country's resources. And we've also seen a strategy that multinationals separate territories and destroy states, creating chaos around it. We must be very careful with fake news that are all around and make a common front for democracy around the world and freedom of political arrestees like Julia Glass and Assange. I think that the alert for information will be decisive. Thank you very much for being with us. You have been very kind by sharing your information. In the next part, we will make a small pause. As always, we will go to the following. The U.S. bet to destroy the Islamic Republic of Iran has been such that not only pressed on its European parties and other countries regarding Iran, the sanctions, and the Iranian nuclear agreement, but some hours before, the Warsaw Conference took place in Warsaw, promoted by the United States. And even if it was sold as a space to design stability for the Middle East, it was actually a space to design a strategy that asphyxiate the Islamic Republic. Why so much interest in Iran? We will develop this with a question that is still pending. Is the arms race probable? We'll be back. Munich Conference, the future of global order. This is our critical move today. It's important to add some items. On February 14 and 15, almost agreeing with the Munich Security Council, In Warsaw, a meeting was held between the United States, the promoter of this conference, and Saudi Arabia in order to promote allegedly a future peace, even if there are declarations that the express purpose contained in documents is not real. Judging by the guests in Warsaw, in a future that ignores Syria, Iran, and Russia, there's even a significant world partner like China. In a U.S. Conference of Cairo, Mike Pompeo has set the goals of this meeting, objective Iranian regime, and establish a strategic alliance between Jews, Saudis against Sunnis. Netanyahu revealed that he would attend a meeting with a representative of the most important Arab countries and that they are joining with Israel to advance in the war against Iran. Netanyahu stepped back on those words and said that it was a mistranslation of Hebrew, but the published media leave no doubt. On that day, Iran was subject to a deadly attack after celebrating 40 years of the celebration of Islamic Revolution. Vice President Mike Pence made a great alliance with Israel and certain Middle East countries against Iran and pressed Europe, saying that they have not cooperated to keep the agreement with Iran to leave. The summit is similar to that held on February 13 between Putin and his Iran and Turkish peers to speeding the solution of the Syrian conflict. Through Skype, we have Arturo Gay, Mexican politologist who lives in Germany. Arturo, welcome to Critical Move. I would like to ask you, why is the United States so interested in destroying the Islamic Republic of Iran? They are designing a strategy, according to what we just listened. According to our sources, they talk about creating a great coalition. Why? What for? Thank you for your invitation. Greetings to you and your viewers. First of all, we have to clarify that since Trump took office, this anti-Iranian position has been strengthened, something the United States has always had, but now with Trump's government, there is a greater commitment with the state of Israel that has traditionally held Iran as an enemy. This closer cooperation between Iran and the United States has been revealed in different ways. Let's remember Trump's acknowledgement on the capital of Israel, Jerusalem, and his urge for suffocating the government of Iran. For the United States, Iran plays the role of the enemy, the incarnation of evil, and it benefits in many senses. One of these benefits of having named enemies, for example, the shield of missiles deployed in Eastern Europe in the border with the Russian Federation, which is not to counteract the Russian atomic capacity, but officially they say that it is to protect Europe from a possible attack from Iran. This is only one of the examples I can set on how the United States uses Iran to press on different international agenda. We can also say that the sole fact that Israel and Saudi Arabia are united or meet to discuss security matters tells us they are discussing on everything except security. On the contrary, they are planning how to destabilize their neighbor Iran. For me, Saudi Arabia, security and democracy is an oxymoron. I would ask something we had pending on the DNF treaty. We moved from Warsaw to Munich. In August, this treaty could be a past move since after U.S. withdrawal and Russia said it is willing to negotiate. The United States rejected this, and finally Russia responded with reciprocity. Some are talking about the multilateralization of the treaty, and China objecting. Is an arms race, a Cold War type, probable? Well, we are living confirmation of this race. I wouldn't call it in the sense of the Cold War because at that time they were focused on the amount of nuclear weapons that one or other country could have ready and prepared, and the capacity they had to hit the other. But at this time, as we've seen, the avant-garde of this race is technology, and especially the capacity of neutralizing the enemy's response capacity. So it's not about eliminating in a single coup, but giving a first coup and being sure that the adversary will not respond. This is what they pretend with this anti-missile shield in the Russian Federation to counteract a possible atomic response from Russia. And Russia answers with the creation of weapons that are not vulnerable to any defense mechanism that the United States could develop from here in the next 15-30 years with the most sophisticated weapons President Putin has shown to the media, such as the non-crewed submarine or intercontinental vector that has capacity to stay in the skies indefinitely. So the war race takes place in the context of the creation of technology to overcome the enemy's defense, and not as before, the strategy was to destroy the enemy in a single coup. In my opinion, we are in an arms race already in technology. Thank you very much, Professor. We will now go to our conclusions. The established world order after the Second World War seems to have reached an end, since the report presented in this security meeting in Munich confirms it. I remind you, the great puzzle. Who will pick up the pieces? The close alliance between U.S. and Germany is breaking and threatens to take away a large part of Europe. For some, this is a confrontation. For others, it is simply a tactic difference. While the UK persists in the Brexit, they defend the project of taking gas directly from Germany. Defends the project of taking gas directly from Russia. Nuclear warheads are dangerous, and there are some delegations, and both parties are negotiating without an agreement. Iran is still a matter of concern in Europe, Israel, and its allies. This is a reconfiguration of world powers. In this context, we must see something very important, the positions that the peoples could take, organized, structured people in a social movement against war, many times absent from the World Conference like that of Munich. This is the end of our critical move. Thank you for being with us.